Well, we serve a wonderful Lord.
Amen.
A God who can do anything. If He can make man out of dust or dust out of nothing, He can certainly make us, if we're nothing too, into something really great. And I'm very thankful that He's given us a call. This afternoon I want to talk to you about a call that He has given to us that is being pretty much neglected among God's people today. And that is the call to be a temperance worker. When I was in academy years ago, they had temperance orations, they called them. And I wasn't much of an orator. I could hardly stand up in front of people. It wasn't until I colported and went door to door for a whole summer that I really got enough courage to talk to strangers. But I wanted to talk about a subject and they wouldn't let me. Because they said it wasn't a temperance subject. I wanted to talk about overeating. And they said you can talk about tobacco, you can talk about alcohol, but you can't talk about overeating because that's not a temperance subject. Well, in my adolescent mind, I thought it was. And is it? Would you agree?
Yes.
Biggest one.
It is a big one. Ellen White was a tremendous temperance speaker. Of all her subjects on health, it was her favorite subject. She tied in with the Women's Christian Temperance Union, but not as a member or their representative, but as, affiliate, because they were doing a good work. Our movement started on a temperance front with Joseph Bates, the sea captain, who on sea is kind of like construction language. And his speech cleaned up, and he laid down the law on his ship that no one would swear. Kay has a brother who's an electrician, works in Seattle, and he's a relatively new Christian. And he is such a good electrician, they put other people with him. So he's in charge of a crew building these big high-rise apartment buildings and things. And he said, there's one thing you can't do while you're working with me. You can't swear. So they kind of snicker and they make a little fun of him. But guess what they don't do? They don't take God's name in vain. And I'm glad he's taken that stand. He needs our prayers because Kay has dropped off a bombshell on him called the Great Controversy. Now he's got to face something that he has to learn about Christianity that he hasn't mastered yet. But when Ellen White spoke to temperance audiences, thousands of people came. And that was without microphones, without amplifier speaker systems. None of that was in existence. And her voice could be heard in a large auditorium. And our voice is getting real weak on that subject now. When I was in medical training, they came up with the 5-day plan to stop smoking. And Seventh-day Adventists were the leaders of helping people quit smoking. I learned how to give part of the lectures and took 1 week out of my cardiology elective to go to Winnemucca, Nevada and lecture on to a group wanting to quit smoking. And the cardiologist, who was a non-Seventh-day Adventist Air Force doctor, he said, you're welcome to take the week off because there's nothing you can do that'll help people's hearts more than helping them quit tobacco. So he turned me loose to go up there and work with a pastor friend, and I learned to do it and worked with many evangelists and pastors and other speakers on that subject. Ellen White says, in this little book called A Medical Evangelism, messengers should be appointed who can present the Word of God from city to city upon the subject of temperance. Have you ever heard of anything happening like that around here? Or any other large city? Large temperance rallies? Why, there's Christians having football stadium rallies. all raising their hands and talking about the gospel and praying for America. I'll tell you, friends, if temperance comes to America, it'll do more than any other thing you can do at the ballot box. Because intemperance in appetite leads the stage to alcohol, and alcohol is leading the stage to all these other drugs that we never heard of years ago. Servant of the Lord says, the tame way in which the temperance question is being handled by our people is not in harmony with the necessities of the times. The work of making known our belief in matters of temperance should now be entered into most heartily. When I was driving up this way from Spokane, there were billboards advertising intemperance. Not just the latest drink, but a green substance that has taken Washington and Oregon and Colorado and other states now set to vote on it by a storm. And I'm talking, of course, about marijuana. And is that a temperance issue? Yes. And is the Seventh-day Adventist movement speaking loudly on that subject? No. Hardly a whisper. Maybe a little bit in a publication like Last Generation magazine. I saw it there. Which very few people out in the streets get. Although you could, with profit, send it to your friends and neighbors. We're told in the advocacy of the cause of temperance, our efforts are to be multiplied. The subject of Christian temperance should find a place in our sermons in every city where we labor. Health reform in all its bearings is to be presented before the people, and special efforts made to instruct the youth, the middle-aged, and the aged in the principles of Christian living. So how many people need it? We've got the youth, and who else? The middle-aged. That's all you, of course. And then the aged in the principles of Christian living. And she says, let this message of this phase of the message be revived, and let the truth go forth as a lamp that burneth. And I say, amen. It's time for us to do our part. We had the experience in Cresswell, as Oregon passed the law, like Washington did, allowing what they call recreational marijuana. And the city council was going to talk about it. And I only went to the city council once before, and that's when they were talking about an airport issue. And I said to Kay, we've got to go and speak. And what they were trying to talk about is what should our town do, because every town can vote its own acceptance or rejection of the law that has been permitted by the state legislature. And so I learned that in Pierce County, for example, second largest county in the state of Washington, they have voted no to marijuana sales. They're a dry, as it were, dry county. And so I went to our town, and they said, anybody who wants to speak, sign in. And so I walked up, signed my name. I was the only one that spoke on the subject, except for the people presenting the other side. Where should we have the store? Where can we sell the marijuana? How can we be in compliance with the law? And how can we get the most taxes out of it? Which is a terrible incentive to government, which in alcohol and tobacco we call sin tax. Not S-Y-N-T-A-X, but S-I-N. Sin tax. I call it marijuana tax sin tax too. Because it's classed by the federal government as a Class 1 narcotic, which physicians cannot prescribe. It's classed, there's only two drugs that are classed as Class 1, and that's marijuana and heroin. And now they want to just turn it loose and make it free for the taxing and the smoking. A pilot friend of mine went to a gathering, and he It was in the neighborhood. They were talking about a sign as they enter that particular subdivision. And they brought refreshments. There was pop and various cookies and cakes and things. And somebody brought cookies and set them on a plate with the other cookies. And he took one and had sudden chest pain and thought he was having a heart attack, had to go to the emergency room. And the emergency room doctor said, "You'll be glad to know that your heart is fine," after EKG and other tests. He said, "But let's test a sample of your urine," and there it was. Cannabinoids, THC. He said, "You'll be glad to know that it's just marijuana." And inadvertently, he had taken one of these cookies, and there were children present at the gathering, just neighbors, and he'd gotten the effects of acute toxicity, but worse than that, he couldn't fly. And so as a helicopter pilot for one of the logging companies, he was grounded for a long time, and I had to actually see him, retest him, prove that he was clear, and write it up for the FAA as accidental poisoning, and got him his job back. The same would be true if you were a truck driver or bus driver or other things. There's some things that you just can't do under that influence. And so one of our church members was given some little brownie by someone, said, "This will help your migraine headaches." She ended up in the emergency room too. And when Kay and I talked to her, we said, "What was in your mind?" Because she knew what she was trying to sample. But the question has arisen because the marketing is all on the positive side. No one today is being told of the dangers of the use of marijuana, not even Seventh-day Adventists. And so I've taken upon myself, I think with the Lord's prompting, to share some things with you this afternoon that I want you to go out and share with others. Same chapter that talks about the secret things belonging to God. But this is verse 18 and 17 and 18. "Ye have seen their abominations and their idols, wood and stone, silver and gold, which were among them. Lest there should be among you man or woman or family or tribe, whose heart turneth away this day from the Lord our God, to go and serve the gods of these nations. Lest there should be among you a root that beareth gall and wormwood." Do you see that there in your Bible?
Yes.
A root that beareth gall and wormwood. "And it come to pass, when he heareth the words of this curse, that he bless himself in his heart." So what do we call when you hear a curse and you take it as a blessing? What church specializes in confusion? Babylon, yes. When you hear the words of this curse, like God says you must not do this, or this and this and this will happen to you, instead he bless himself in his heart, saying, "I shall have peace, though I walk in the imagination of mine heart, to add drunkenness to thirst." So here it's going from bad to worse, bad to confusion of mind to drunkenness and total disorientation, based on the taking of gall and wormwood. Now, gall is an old medicine. And it was even offered to people when they were about to suffer death. And one of them was Jesus on the cross. They offered him gall, mingled with what? Myrrh. Myrrh is the word in Matthew and Mark. Vinegar is mentioned when he said, "I thirst," in the Gospel of John. But gall mingled with myrrh. These were mind-numbing poisons that were used to help bear the pain of crucifixion. And when Jesus was offered that, what did he do? He refused it, because his mind needed to be clear to maintain his connection with God, even though his body was suffering excruciating pain. Are you with me on that? So this was written in the book of Moses, that we would be wise to not use any root that changes our mind, our thoughts, even though it relieves some pain. And wormwood is an interesting substance. People are going to health food stores and they're buying wormwood. And we know a lady down in Mexico that was using a lot of wormwood. She almost had a nervous breakdown. Her thoughts were confused. She got depressed. And she thought that was a remedy for her. But what wormwood is a chemical that causes thought processes to change. And its chemical name, the alkaloid in the wormwood, is absinthe. Absinthe. Absinthe was very popular for decades in France in pubs, where they would mix it with wine and other alcoholic drinks. And they would talk about all kinds of things. One famous artist that frequented the place by the name of Picasso was able to do prize-winning artwork that people go to art galleries and admire, even though they don't understand it at all. But that was under the influence of absinthe. Now, do you want to be under the influence of that? France actually banned it. They outlawed it in the pubs. They still drink the wine, but they banned this because people were doing crazy things under its influence. So God long ago said, stay away from this. And it's an herb. So people say, well, if it's an herb, that must make it good. But tobacco is an herb too, isn't it? Sure, it's a plant. But it's a poisonous plant. And this is a poisonous substance. Now, let me give you a little illustration of that from science, because they're actually changing the terminology a lot. They used to call it mostly pot and weed and skunkweed and things like that. And now they call it cannabis and, dress up the name and the terminology and the advertising. And in Washington State, when they first started selling it in the Seattle area, some of the pop bottles that they were called pot pop, they actually popped, they exploded. And there was glass all over the store. And they had to take all the bottles, scoop them up and put them in a metal container, and they kept going off in there. And the company wouldn't recall them because they're afraid to come up and take them anywhere until they finally all exploded. I think they overcharged them with carbon dioxide or something, but they were going off like a rocket. So they've actually promoted this as a medicinal agent for MS and fighting cancer and eye diseases and all kinds of things like that. But this substance refers, as you know, to dried leaves, flowers, stems, and seeds from the hemp plant, Cannabis sativa. And it contains a mind-altering chemical, delta-9 tetracannabinol, or THC, and other compounds. And they're breeding more and more different kinds to have varying amounts of the substance. But it's the commonest used illicit drug in the United States. And it's the most common drug used by teenagers today. Which is why I think Seventh-day Adventists need to arise and shine in the public schools and among the teachers of our next generation and be ready to speak out on the subject. By the way, when I went to our town meeting and spoke, they had 3 minutes for each speaker, and even though I was the only one speaking, they cut it right off at 3 minutes. And so I didn't get to say much. But when they voted a moratorium on its sales until this next election in November. That was months ago. They just cut it off. And now it goes before the local people to decide whether they want it or not. And Unfortunately, our mayor is, even though he's a clergyman, is ambivalent on the subject, and in his latest editorial in our town news, he didn't take any position at all. And Kay and I are all stirred up. As soon as, maybe on the way home, or as soon as we get home, we've got to write something for that paper and speak up before the election comes. But the rates of marijuana use among middle and high school students has gone up rapidly, which is a critical thing to our youth, because under the influence of this drug, they are less likely to graduate, they are going to get poorer grades, they aren't going to be diligent about their homework, and they're not going to be holding summer jobs and looking for work and becoming ambitious, because it tends to put people to sleep in la-la land. So people that smoke, I could go into some of the use of it, but how it affects the brain. It goes quickly from the lungs to the bloodstream and up to the brain, and is absorbed a little slower when a person eats or drinks it than if they smoke it. But they'll feel the effects in 30 minutes to an hour, and they get altered senses. They see brighter colors, they have an altered sense of time, and you know, young people have an altered sense of time anyway. You just put a little cell phone in their hand or something with a few buttons, and time goes by very rapidly, and they're entertaining themselves while getting what's called like trigger thumb, only they have a word for it now. And so they get changes in mood, not always to the best. They get impaired body movements, they have difficulty thinking and problem solving, and impaired memory. Now, does that sound like a good substance? No, not at all. There are long-term effects. It affects brain development. When a marijuana uses as a teenager, the drug reduces thinking, memory, and learning functions, and affects how the brain builds connections between the areas necessary for these functions. It can last a long time or even be permanent. They have found out that side stream marijuana smoke is more harmful than side stream tobacco smoke, as far as its effect on the people in the room. So that would be, you know, the breathing, but not the smoking of it. The other thing is, physically it irritates the lungs and gives the same breathing problems that tobacco smokers have, including the risk of lung cancer. There's an increased heart rate up to 3 hours after smoking, so it increases the chance, quite possibly, of a heart attack. Older people are maybe at higher risk. Marijuana's use during pregnancy is linked to increased risk of brain and behavioral problems in the baby. If a pregnant woman uses marijuana, the drug may affect certain developing parts of the fetus's brain and may end up with problems of attention, memory, and problem solving. Well, I say in this day and age we need to be able to solve problems. And our children and our grandchildren need to be growing up without this weed. Kay and I had a personal stress over this as we looked across the pasture at our neighbor's property, and we saw marijuana growing there. They just sold the property, and we thought our neighbors were all just nice Buddhist people, and we found out that later that it had been bought by a man and he just hired them to do the gardening, and we could smell the whole valley smelled like a skunk. And a friend of mine had helped me identify it, because I hadn't been around it enough to know the aroma was. He picked it up just like that. He said, "That's weed growing there." And sure enough it was. Kay looked with binoculars, and there was all the plants. And then a fence went up, a bamboo fence, covered a whole big area. and it was behind the fence. So I thank the Lord for a praying wife. She prayed, Lord, get that out of there. We never knew how the Lord would answer our prayer or how quick He would take charge. Not too long after that, there was a helicopter flying very low over the treetops, right over the land. And then it went on its way. And shortly thereafter, there was a group of officers that came in, federal, county, sheriffs, drug enforcement, 30 of them all together. Some of them in camo garb, some of them with machine guns, some of them with everything they'd have to do a raid. And they moved in and took out over 1,000 plants. Some of them with trunks like this, took them all night with chainsaws, cutting it down, and 5 or 6 dump truck loads of the bushes that were 6 to 7 feet tall or more, and took it all away. And the people that were there ended up wearing bracelets they'd probably never worn before. We thought they couldn't speak English. The sheriff said as soon as they got the handcuffs on, 3 of them could speak very good English. And the interesting thing was they came through our gate to get there, and our gate has a new chain on it and a new lock. But we just thank the Lord that He's cleaned house. Now we don't know what's going to happen to that property, but we're watching it real close. Because we want it for God's people in the end time, not for those that are growing weed. The mental effects of marijuana use include things like temporary hallucinations, sensations and images that seem real, though they're not real, temporary paranoia, extreme distrust of others, which is why the authorities come in with all their armaments, worsening symptoms in patients with schizophrenia, because they get paranoia and get hallucinations, and other mental health problems like depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts, especially among teenagers. Do you see what a devastating thing this can be to a society that's right on the edge of judgment? And in life they get lower satisfaction in life, poorer mental health, poorer physical health, and more relationship problems with others. Now I think it's time for some of the Adventists to spread the word about this. And to look for opportunities to civic groups, to school associations, to young people, to their teachers, to parent groups. Wouldn't it be wonderful for some of the Adventists to take the lead in the temperance reform? And that's the current issue. We all know that alcohol is a problem. And Kay and I got interested in helping people with alcohol because we had some close friends that were into that, and we began researching organizations, institutions, places to dry out, others to get cured, and we've done a lot of counseling and prayer and Bible study with people that were struggling with alcohol. We were making good success with one man until his pastor, he goes to a Sunday church that has a woman pastor, and she was afraid she was going to lose his contributions to the offering plate. And so she opposed us vigorously. And through his wife and others, he backed off. And she was quite happy for him to be a somewhat temperate drinker, a social drinker, as long as he didn't get intoxicated and get really drunk, which was his original problem. The only problem was social drinking is not a cure for alcoholism. It is not enough for a person to just drink once in a while, a glass of wine when they go out to eat or something. They have to abstain entirely. And you don't have to ask a Seventh-day Adventist that. You just ask Alcoholics Anonymous what they teach. And they will say the same thing. So this man cut back, quit for a little while, and then he was drinking. And finally, he got hammered by the sheriff. And now before he gets to drive his pickup truck, he has to blow into a device on the steering wheel before he can start his pickup truck. And that's only to go to work. I mean, he basically lost his license. We were trying to save him from that embarrassment. And I think when we see people drinking, we shouldn't just pull away and say, you know, I'm holier than thou. I wouldn't want anything to do with you because you are doing bad things to your body. We need to get close to people and try to help them and show our concern and share the truths that we know with others. Are you with me? Would you like to join the cause? Ellen White said we should sign the temperance pledge. Well, I have one in my wallet, a little pledge card. And I was hoping to have them here for you, but Kay informs me that we've just laid them out and we're about to send them to be printed. We're going to print a really nice looking business card that's a temperance pledge, urging everybody to carry one in their wallet. If you ever get pulled over for speeding, you pull that out along with your driver's license and you tell them you won't need to blow in the balloon or take the test. But we'll send some to you here because I think that's an important issue now. The other thing, as far as marijuana goes, we need to help our civic organizations realize that the cost is greater than the possible gain from legalizing marijuana. They have legalized it thinking they can tax it and bring millions in, but most of the sheriffs know that the cost is going to be greater than the gain. The cost in crime, the cost in the loss of a generation, in their mental development, the cost to society in their homes, and in the productivity of our people as a nation is going to be greater than any possible revenue into the local, state or community coffers from taxation. And so I don't have those statistics to give you right off because some of that has yet to be written as time goes on. But I want to appeal to our people and appeal to others that I have opportunity to speak to that this is a critical situation. It is a crisis. When tobacco was under siege and lawsuits were being filed against smoke that was causing lung cancer and premature death, and they were going to sue the tobacco companies for huge payments, they went to court, first in Florida, and they said, we're willing to pay on one condition. And the judge said, what's that? Said, we're willing to pay, but you must be even-handed. If you will tax or penalize the alcohol industry and the meat industry the same as you're coming after us, we will pay. And they swallowed hard and they backed off on their punitive action against the tobacco companies because they realized that they were right. You've got to be fair with people, and there were just as many people being hurt and killed by alcohol or prematurely given heart attacks by meat or cancer as there were from the tobaccos. So we have a need for the health message to be shared like never before. Nutrition and temperance will make us the head and not the tail. And we can't expect the White House to champion it right now. The problem there, as you know, is that we have leadership that has been raised on pot and on alcohol and bragged that we got the first brewery in the nation in the White House now. And so when that happens, what does the Bible say when our leaders imbibe. Woe to the nation. And so my prayer is that we find somebody to be in leadership, whether it's the state capital or the national capital, or our leaders that are temperate people. And while we're not counseled to vote for individuals and champion political contests, we can vote on issues. And we can speak on issues. And we can encourage the cause of temperance in our society as never before. Here was an interesting reference from, this came originally from a manuscript in 1898. The use of intoxicating drink which dethrones reason, and tobacco which clouds the brain and poisons the life current is increasing. Are young men prepared to lift their voices in the cause of temperance and show its bearing upon Christianity? Will they engage in the holy war against appetite and lust? What is it called? A holy war. Now, those who come from Middle East countries, they have a holy war called jihad. Well, that's a different war, isn't it? Considerable different. This is called a holy war against appetite and lust. Now, where do we start? We fight the battle against our worst enemy, which is us. And then we try to help others. And a church that has embraced temperance movement, not just personal practice, but advocacy and teaching and writing and sharing on this, can become a very important voice in our society. And we may not be able to overturn laws, but we can help some. And we can save some youth, especially. So I want to encourage you in that regard. The other thing is I wanted to share about some food issues today. There is a chemical that has been found in food, fast food particularly. I've got it written down here somewhere because it's a real long name. And I'll come up with it in a little bit. But it is a chemical that is used in fast foods like hot dogs and hamburgers, and under the arches, Burger King, pizza places, those that serve meats. And it causes cancer. And there is an advocacy group that has actually gone to bat against this, put it on the internet. And of course you can read all kinds of things on the internet. But this has come out in a way that is very convincing. I think I left it in my briefcase and don't have it in front of me right now. So Kay will help me. But there is a greater need than ever to be careful about what we eat. And that means foods that are raised with pesticides, additives, chemicals, hormones, things that are put into the food. Mostly they're in the animal products. So if you give up cheese and you give up meat and you go into a plant-based dietary, you don't have too much risk of this. But there are some that are getting into the plant foods. And wheat, for example, which Eastern Washington, Eastern Oregon are very famous for. Thank you, dear. Is spraying the wheat with Roundup just before harvest. And they brag about it on the internet. Glyphosate is what it's called, an herbicide. They've now found it in oatmeal and baby food that are made with oats. And the reason they spray it on is because it kills all the weeds and gives them about 5 to 10% more yield in the harvest as they combine these vast acreages of grain. But the problem is there's residues of that on the wheat unless you get organic wheat. And more you're seeing bakeries producing organic breads, organic cereals, and they say no GMO, but they also should say organic on them. Because GMO is not the only issue, organic is important. And so they actually are spraying this on the field, and within 2 weeks of final harvest, and there it is as a residue. There are many people that are sensitive to eating bread that think they're allergic to wheat, and they're not allergic to gluten or to wheat. They're allergic to the Roundup that's sprayed on it. So that's another just word of caution for our people. There's another one that's very interesting that just came out on October 6th, and that is people that are living where there's many ticks. And I don't know what it's like here. Probably not too many, but maybe some. In places there's many ticks, they're getting bitten by the ticks, and some are developing a severe meat allergy from the tick bite. Can you imagine that? See, the ticks feed on the animals, and they got the crossover with the blood, and then they want a bite of you, and people are getting what's called tick-induced mammalian meat allergy, and between 2 and 10 hours after eating red meat, they get a bad reaction, like a rash or sudden stress, breathing trouble, and they find that it's related to ticks. They found this in Australia and New Zealand and USA where there's more ticks than any other place in the world for some reason. So that's another interesting finding. And now they're finding also that foods that are rich in phytochemicals, and in probiotic ingredients, friendly bacteria, that it's better for your mental health. And that having the good flora in your intestinal tract helps your mental health. So what it all adds up to is that the closer we get to nature and to God's plan, closer to the garden and to the conditions that God put Adam and Eve in the beginning, the better our health is going to be. Amen. And that's something you can pass on to your neighbors too, because who do you know that doesn't want to be healthy? Everybody wants to be healthier. And so the health message is, as we're told, the entering wedge, a way to show your concern, your love for your neighbors, your desire to see them saved from disease and not be incapacitated by mental issues. And you can do it with absolute assurance that you're telling the truth. It's not speculative. It's not based on hearsay. And it's undergirded in two ways. I like to think of it like 2 feet on the ground, one being science and the other being inspiration. And if you've got words from Ellen White saying this is what we ought to do, and science says yes, you've got a strong case of making even a scientific presentation to the public. If you've got something that some quasi-scientist has come up with that's just sort of speculative and based on maybe a multi-level marketed product, then be careful, because we don't have any inspiration backing it. And we're told that the final message is going to be a very sacrificial one, not a lucrative one. So that is something I wanted to share. Now the other part is in the book of Acts. Let's go back to the Bible for a little bit, and then we're going to have some questions and discussion. Acts 24:25. This shows the Apostle Paul at the end of his life and what he preached about. Acts 24, verse 25. And he preached to a man and his wife, Felix and Drusilla. And as he reasoned of three things, do you see them there? Righteousness, temperance, and judgment to come, Felix trembled and answered, Go thy way, for this time when I have a convenient season I will call for thee. Paul's sermon was on three things. One is righteousness. We call that Christ's our righteousness. Second was temperance, our health message. Third was judgment to come. That's the three angels' message. So he gave the judgment hour cry, he gave a call to turn your hearts over to God, and he called the leadership to temperance. And I say it's time to call the leadership of our country to temperance. And our congressmen, and our governors, and our people. And I believe that if we had temperance at the dinner table and temperance with our beverages and did whatever we eat or drink or whatever we do to the glory of God, people would not be making so many crazy, immoral decisions that they are making today. And we have our share of it in Eugene with people dressing in the most outlandish ways. Somebody who's obviously a man dressed like a lady. And now they're getting even stranger in that they think they can go into the ladies' restroom and scare everybody there and do it in schools and stores. And I think some of the Adventists ought to speak up and say that's unnatural and it's unbiologic and it's wrong. I mean, our friend Little Bear, he went down there to the rally where Bernie Sanders was coming in, and all kinds of strange things erupted around his campaign there in Eugene and Springfield. And he went up to the policeman, he says, you know, this is wrong. This is sinful. And they said, oh, you just hate these people. He said, no, I don't hate anybody. I love them. I want them to be saved. They're just sinning. That's what they're doing. They're sinning. And what were we told in the book Education, page 57? The greatest want of the world is the want of men who will not be bought or sold, men who in their inmost souls are true to honest, men who will not fear to call sin by its right name, men whose consciences are as true to duty as the needle to the pole, men who will stand for the right though the heavens fall. That's the prerequisites of the 144,000 to stand. And so I'm not going to speak more on this, but I want to just give you the text that I quoted earlier of Jesus on the cross was Matthew 27:34 and Mark 15:23. Found that in the notes Kay handed me, and those are the texts that show that Jesus said no to a mind-benumbing drug. And I believe there's a time to get put to sleep if you're having an operation. God even did that to Adam when he took his rib out. So that's appropriate. But let's keep our minds clear. Let's keep our thoughts pure. Let's keep our motives clean. And let's go forward with undaunted faith to advance the cause of God in this final time of Earth's history. Because we are facing a crisis that we've never seen before. I never would have imagined 20 years ago what we're seeing promoted by not only a few Supreme Court justices, but also in the pulpits of worldly churches. And And this is not a time to ape the world. It's a time to emulate the cause of Christ. So may the Lord bless you and keep up your courage and be a good temperance reformer in your neighborhood and among your family. And save our youth. Save them every way you can. Be like that woman in Baltimore when they were having riots against the policemen. And she went out and she grabbed her boy out of that crowd and she started spanking him. And she says, you don't you run with these, I don't know what she called them, ruffians or whatever, hoodlums. She said, you go home. And her boy went home. And you know the city called that dedicated single mother, they called her Mother of the Year. And she got recognized. Not for abusing her little Johnny, you know, but for being a true mother to her wayward son. So may the Lord help us. And we'll take a few questions now, and we'll just transition our meeting to try and help as many people as we can. And